Hello friends, my name is Marinus and I have had just like the wildest year and the wildest reading year because of that. And I just feel like I am doing my best to like stay afloat in terms of reading and content creation, but everything is so scattered. And this is what happens to me when I get into to-do list debt. And that's how I feel I am with my content and with reading is then I then have a brain block about like picking what to do. Like I feel like I owe people projects and I'm supposed to be reading specific things and there are things that I should be doing. And so if I prioritize one over the other, like how do I do that? But then also I'm in a really weird reading mood because everything has been so stressful. And so I just like freeze and I don't know what to do, which only makes me get into more to-do list debt. And that's very much where I have been, but it's really funny because you can tell that I'm like trying every so often to like get ahead of it. I have started and stopped so many books. I was talking about this again in my Discord and I was like, I don't know, I feel like pulled in all these directions. And an idea that somebody in my Discord had was to put all of the books that I've started and not finished on a spinning wheel and let the spinning wheel choose for me. And it's not necessarily that I have to read what it lands on, but that will be a gut check of like, do I even want to read this anymore? Do I like close it off and like take it off the list and admit to myself this is not like an outstanding thing? I can just like do away with it. So I thought that sounded like a great idea and a great way to come back. I know that this is like not a thing for anybody else but myself, or at least it is primarily a thing for myself. I do feel like I have talked about certain projects and not delivered, and that is also to do with you guys, but like primarily I know that I'm putting the most pressure on myself. So this is an attempt to catch up with that. I did immediately put everything on the spinny wheel and choose my first book, which I will put here on the screen. And it was, I know I cropped it weird, but I will do better for the next pick. But it is The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy. I picked this book for a 5-3-1 video. It is a video where I make a prediction for a 5-star rated book, a 3-star rated book, and a 1-star rated book. And then I like read the book and tell you if my predictions were right at each of those points. So I have my first video in that series up, but that series like idea actually started with like an earlier video that I like picked the books for and started and never finished. And so for the 3 books, my 1-star prediction was Aragon, which I read. My 5-star prediction was Chain Gang All Stars, which I also read. And so the only book that I had left to read to finish that project was The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy, which was my 3-star prediction. I have started this book, I swear to you, like no exaggeration, 5 or 6 times, and I get just into a few chapters and like something about it, I just immediately am not hooked and I put it down. And it's nothing that I can quantify at this point. There's nothing like glaringly wrong with it. I'm just kind of like meh, and I put it down, which makes sense for like a 3-star prediction book that is just like not here or there and being in a weird reading mood, like not really gripping me. So that was one reason that like that video never got made, but I really love the like idea of the video. So I just picked 3 new books and actually made that video. And then the other thing was that there was so much time between Aragon and finishing Chain Gang All Stars that I completely yeeted the entire experience of Aragon from my mind. Like I know that it was 2 stars and I didn't think it was as bad as I was thought it would be, but you could offer me $1 trillion right now to name one of the characters in Aragon that is not Aragon, and I would not be able to do it. Like absolutely no memory of what I read there. I did not retain any of it. And so I couldn't review it, and then I would have to like read it again. So I just felt like that project was lost. The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy is an adult fantasy romance. In this world, the ways that souls are collected and ferried is a little different, and the work that Mercy does as the Undertaker brings her into contact with Hart, the Marshal, and they are constantly at odds. They annoy each other, they bicker a lot, they get under each other's skin. Mercy is having to deal with the pressure of trying to keep up the family business by herself when it actually should pass on to her brother, and Hart is dealing with being really lonely in his life and in his career. So one day he writes a letter and he addresses it only to a friend, and it gets delivered to Mercy, and they strike up a friendship, but they don't know who the other is immediately, and so it becomes about whether or not they can sustain this relationship when all of the truth is revealed. I finished The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy, and unfortunately for me, it was like a little less than a 3-star read. I think quality wise overall, it probably is a 3-star, but like enjoyment wise, I really had a tough time with that book, but in a way that I was like very aware why the things that were happening were not for me. I will say that this is like a you've got mail sort of situation. I think that I had trouble with like the whole central conceit. I found the antagonism between the two main characters just like sort of eye rolly, especially for like two adults. I understood like the explanation of why they were kind of like snippy with each other, but it was just kind of like, get over it. And then like the letters were cute at the beginning, but like the drawn out way that it becomes a thing between them, that one of them knows who the other is, like that also just became very wearing for me as a reader and within the plot, especially because the climax is related to these letters in a way that didn't feel like super believable or super earned. Again, I was just kind of like, get over it. And the dynamic that gets introduced into a romantic relationship when there is like that sort of secret identity, it just starts inviting a lot of questions about like informed consent and all of that in ways that just added an additional layer of like discomfort for me. It was fine. Sometimes it was cute, sometimes it really annoyed me, and overall I would just give it like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Back to the wheel. And here we go. The 5th season. So this is actually a book that I have already read before. I read the first book. I really loved it. I never continued on in the series, very specifically because I felt like it would be heartbreaking. Like my brain glances off of it, like when I consider it as a thing to read. But I made this a buddy read in my Discord for us to slow read through this entire series. And I wanted to start it with a reread of the 5th season before continuing on. And people have done it. Like we've been doing it again. Like as people get to it, they come into the chat and they talk about it, so it's very low pressure, but I still feel pressure to read this thing that, you know, like is being buddy read in my Discord. I guess I'm going to reread the 5th season. Wish me luck. I know that this is still going to be heartbreaking, but hopefully it won't be as stressful and heartbreaking with like foreknowledge. So it's been a few years since I've read it. I feel like it was pretty memorable, so there are still like pieces of it, and I feel like even just talking about it right now, like I have a visual image of like the world and the way that it made me feel. So it really has stuck out, but I'm sure there are like details that I'm forgetting, and I think reading through it again, sort of knowing what happens, should be very, very interesting. The 5th season by N.K. Jemisin is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. It is an adult fantasy. We start the book basically at the end of the world, where a massive earthquake has caused untold destruction and death across this continent, and a woman gets home to find that her husband has brutally murdered her son and run away with her daughter. So Esun takes off on a path to try and find her daughter through like the wreckage of this land, and that is absolutely just the beginning of the story as we weave in and out of perspectives. It took me a pretty long time to finish the 5th season. I took it on 2 trips that I went to, but I did finally finish my reread of the first book. Of course, the plan here is to continue on to reading the rest of the series, and I have that as like one of my end of the year goals. I really, really do want to. As far as the experience of rereading, I still very much appreciated this work and like the way that it was assembled and the character work and the imagination of the worlds and what it did thematically. I think that this is a book that you get even more appreciation for on reread, or at least it lends itself to a different experience on second read than first read, just because the story changes armed with foreknowledge. So that was really cool to go through, especially because I was really surprised and impressed with how much of the story I actually retained. Like there were moments and scenes that like live vividly in my head. So adding that to the fact that like reading it again was a meaningfully different experience was really interesting. The one thing that I have with this book, and it's not like I dock stars, it's still 5-star. I think it's a really impressive work. There's just this one thing that still on second read, I haven't been able to pinpoint if this is just a me thing, a me in this book thing, if it's something with the setup or the pacing of the book. Like I have no idea at this point what it is, but I just know that consistently had this experience with this book in its series, and it's that when I'm reading, I am engaged and I want to know what happens and I'm invested in the characters. But when I put the book down, it becomes very difficult for me to pick it back up again. There's like something, I don't know if it's like a personal brain block. I don't know if it's because the heaviness of the subject matter, but I feel like I read other books that have heavy subject matters, but there's something here that I feel like trips up the momentum and the pace of the story. And whether that's personal experience or actually something within the construction and the pacing of the book, I'm not sure. I can't say, because I just honestly don't know how to verbalize or pinpoint it any more than that. But it was just another experience that I walked away from very much appreciating the book, but also it took me forever to get through, much longer than I think the like size of the book calls for. But I did it. That one comes off my list, and we are ready to spin for a new one. Okay, here we go. The Wonder Engine. This is by T. Kingfisher. I just reread Clockwork Boys. I was like casting around for something to read after the 5th season, and I told everybody in my Discord that I was in the mood for like reading something fantasy and I didn't want to read any of my homework books. And someone suggested T. Kingfisher's newest book, and when I was like looking into the book to see what it was about, I realized, Maddie, you're starting something new. Like, you have other T. Kingfishers that you want to get to. So I reread Clockwork Boys in order to move on and read The Wonder Engine. And look at the universe, it fed me The Wonder Engine. I'm so excited. And I feel like this is going to be a much faster read for me. The Wonder Engine is an adult fantasy book. It is the second book in the Clock Tower War duology. So I'll tell you what the first book, The Clockwork Boys, is about. It is about a paladin, an assassin, and a forger who are a group of criminals who have to band together along with a scholar in order to go like on an espionage mission to gain information about the Clockwork Boys. And the Clockwork Boys are these giant mechanical soldiers from a neighboring kingdom who are threatening to destroy their own. I can't remember if I recorded this already and lost the footage, or if I only think I recorded this or like vaguely remember recording this, but it is what it is. I need to catch you up on my review for The Wonder Engine, and then I also spin the wheel for my next read, and I'll tell you about that as well. So, The Wonder Engine. I really enjoyed this. I think that T. Kingfisher is writing romantic fantasy that I appreciate in a way that like 9 times out of 10, anything described that way, I am not enjoying right now. I think that there are a lot of ways that all of those books are sort of emulating a thing that I fundamentally don't enjoy, whereas conceptually, romance and fantasy are 2 of my favorite genres, so like the blend should work for me. What is actually popular in that subgenre is like very, very not for me. But T. Kingfisher is like actually checking the boxes of things that I enjoy. Her prose and her writing is like better than most of what I find in this subgenre. Her characters, I think, are really well formed, and they feel very different than like the bog standard sort of like alpha hole, mysterious dark man, and the not like other girls, girl with big sword sort of thing that you find copy pasted a lot through this subgenre. And I am generalizing, but I feel like that's what you see repeated a lot, or at least what I've encountered when I'm trying to pick up things that I hear recommended. But she seems to buck that mold a lot with her characters, and her characters feel really fully formed, and I actually find them easy to root for. They're very competent, and I can follow their logic and the logic of the plot. All of that was true in The Wonder Engine. I will say that this duology felt a little weird for me for the way that it was like chopped up in 2. It really is one big story in sort of 2 shorter parts, and neither of those 2 parts individually come off as well paced. I think for The Wonder Engine specifically, there was a point where we were focusing so much on like the second half of the story, which was the will they won't they of the 2 main characters, whether or not they would get together, that at one point I really was like, okay, I'm ready for the plot lot to make a comeback. But like no sooner than I thought that, I actually sent it to my Discord of like, it's getting a little slow. Like my next update was like, okay, things can slow down because I'm stressed. So it was like just at the right moment, sort of like metering out these pieces of the story. But it did, like I did hit that place where I was like, okay, I'm ready to kind of pick it up a little bit now. So not perfect pacing. And I think that like had this been like one cohesive story and sort of like edited together in that way with a few things sort of stripped out, that it would have worked better. I also feel like there is a way that this truly feels like a little piece of like a larger sort of ongoing series or like entries into a larger world, because not everything about the world was like fully fleshed out, but it did whet the appetite enough and made enough sense and like added enough to the story that I am interested in reading more in the world of the white rat. So that was good. So like not perfect, but solid and super enjoyable. And I just love these characters so much. I love them so much. So I would give this like a 4 out of 5 stars. So after that, I did spin the wheel again, and I have the footage of the wheel, which is what makes me think that I recorded this at some point. So here's the footage of the wheel. I swear that I spun it and it landed on this next thing, which is Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. Now, it has also been long enough since my last update and this wheel spin that I have now read this one as well. Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo is an adult magical realism story about a woman named Flor who has this ability to predict the day that someone will die. When she decides that she wants to have a living wake for herself, it throws her family into turmoil as they try to figure out if Flor has foreseen her own death or if something else is happening here. So we follow Flor and her 3 sisters, as well as some of their daughters, the second generation, in the days leading up to the living wake. And we also get to explore each of their gifts, because many of the women in this family have special skills and gifts. I was very, very nervous about reading this one. It was one of my most anticipated reads of 2023, I think, the year that it came out. I've really enjoyed Acevedo's writing previously, even though she's been primarily writing in YA. So like I've enjoyed it, but in a way that I also felt a little removed from it for not being its target audience. It's like her books are some of those books that I read and I think, if I had found this like when I was a teenager, they would have meant everything to me. So I was super looking forward to seeing what she did in the adult space. And as soon as I got this in my Book of the Month subscription, I like cracked it open and I read the first 50 pages, really enjoyed it, but I ended up having to put it down to prioritize like another project. I'm pretty sure it was like reading the Hugo nominations, and so like enough time passed between when I started that I just kind of let it languish. I started it a second time at some point and made it maybe 100 pages and then put it down and never picked it back up again. So I feel like I created sort of a brain block about this book where I was kind of dreading reading it. I think that was compounded by the fact that I heard mixed reviews. I heard negative reviews of this. I heard people saying that it didn't really work and that she was trying too hard to be adult. And I heard a lot of complaints about like one of the magical elements about this story. So all of those things is like creating this like brain block for me where I was kind of dreading picking this up and like not loving it. And I had those false starts as well. So it was a whole thing. I was like, maybe this is like the book that I DNF, but that didn't feel right to me. It's Elizabeth Acevedo. So today I sat myself down and said, you are going to read this whole book like one sitting, because if the problem is that every time you put it down, you don't really want to pick it back up again, just read it in one sitting. It reads very fast. And I felt like that was like the push that I needed. And I did indeed read this today. And I love this, I fear. I kind of get why not everybody would, but this really worked for me. And it is a little odd. It is a little bit strange, but in ways that I felt like is what I expected from magical realism, and especially like in the line of Latine magical realism. I think that everything about it that was like especially odd and especially like uncomfortable and sort of like in your face was purposefully so. And I mean, again, it's okay if like people don't enjoy that. I personally saw value in it, and I enjoy when something feels purposeful and it feels like it's saying something, and everything that Acevedo did in the story felt like it was purposeful and like it was saying something. Her prose just works for me. It feels very economical, like it doesn't feel very showy, and yet she had all of these like moments that felt very witty, that were like turns of phrases. There were multiple times that she would just have a character like be telling a story, and the story would end with like a line or two that would just be like a gut punch of summarizing what that experience meant in a way that, I don't know, it was just, it felt so smart, and it really hit home for me. So her prose is excellent. I also felt like I related a lot to all of the cultural touchstones in this as a Dominican American, as somebody who, I don't know, there were a lot of things that I could see her representing that were like experiences that I have had or my family have had, or like the women in my family or community have had. And like to see that all here, but also a little exaggerated, a little soapy, a little sprinkled with magic, all of that really, really worked for me. The one thing that I will say is that even though it's not like super long and it read relatively quickly, I do think that had it been just a little shorter and snappier, it would have worked even better. I think because we're cycling through characters and it's a lot of people to keep track of, I think that it like is easy to lose the thread. And so like putting it down, thinking about coming back to it, I never had like that, like, oh yeah, I want to find out what happens to so and so, because I don't know, there was just that cycling through characters. So I get that piece as well, but when I sat down and read it all through, like I did actually feel a lot for these characters, for their situations. I think that had it been a little snappier and punchier, or maybe had it not cycled through as many characters, it would have been easier to like grab readers' attentions. But that's really the only complaint that I personally have about this. Like I said, I can see why it didn't work for everybody, but I just think it's really smart and really well done. So I would give this like, I'm between like a 4 and a 4.5 out of 5 stars, but I'm so happy that I actually ended up enjoying it. I can put this on my shelf, I can mark it as read, and I can look forward to the next thing that Acevedo has coming out. I'm feeling like maybe one more spin of the wheel and then we can wrap this up. Why ended at 5? I don't know. That's what the vibes are. So I'll do one more spin of the wheel. And then, I mean, I really enjoyed this. I especially enjoyed because like my thought was like to do these like, you know, quickly to put out a video, but I've let myself kind of sneak these into other things that I'm reading. And so it's helping guide my reading without feeling like too much pressure and too much homework. And it's also helping me get things off my currently reading pile. So it feels like it's being effective. So we'll do one more, we'll wrap this up, but I think I might do more parts. I think this might be a thing that I do with books that I start and put down, is just like keep track of them this way and like force myself to get back to them eventually and really consider like why I've put them down and like, you know, prioritize them into my reading. So let's do one more spin. I'm really excited about this one. How to Read Now by Elaine Castillo, I believe is the author. This is a nonfiction book, and I started listening to it on audio, and I was like, this is a banger. I need to look at this with my eyeballs and sort of like highlight and annotate. So that's why I put it down. I have not gotten a physical copy of it, but this is a good sort of excuse to get the physical copy and really dedicate myself to this. I know I'm going to love this one. I'm so excited to get back to it and then to share with you all my thoughts. How to Read Now by Elaine Castillo is a nonfiction collection of essays about the ethics and politics of reading. That took a lot shorter than any of the other entries in this vlog so far, which means I have done it. I read How to Read Now and I loved it. I knew that I would, because as I mentioned, I started it and was like getting so much already out of it that I wanted to be able to like highlight things and take notes, and that was exactly what happened. This book made me think so much. As you guys all know, I really love thinking about how we consume media in addition to like the media itself, and everything that this said about like being active readers of not only like books but also media and like situations and people around us really, really spoke to me. There honestly has already been an instance where I brought this book up. We were talking in the Discord about things that like depict problematic things and that get labeled as problematic, and like what positive representation actually means, and how that idea of positive representation actually flattens a lot of stories. And there are a lot of people, I think, that have gone from like critiquing media and like thinking actively about what things like carry harmful messages to being like media cops. And like there's so many things that are just like, oh, well, that's problematic because it's depicting something that is problematic. And so this gave me so many words to not only that one example, but so many different things of like how I have existed in these spaces where we are consuming media, where I'm trying to review media and critique media. And it also allowed me to track my own thinking, right? Because I have definitely talked about like positive representation and like reading, building empathy, and like representation mattering in ways that I don't think are wrong, but that have certainly grown for me. Like those ideas have certainly grown for me and changed for me as I learn more. And I think also as we respond to how media and publishing and society changes. And this like captures so many of those ideas incredibly well. So like I had a blast reading this, and I'm going to be recommending it like all the time, especially when I go, oh, like Elaine Castillo says in How to Read Now, and it like presents an argument. I know that this is really going to stick with me. I know I'm definitely going to want to read it again. I know that I'm definitely going to reference it again. In addition to all of that, as a collection of essays, I think that it was very cohesive. I think that Castillo has this really just sort of like snappy voice. She makes jokes all the time. There is like a tongue-in-cheek matter that she approaches all of this, but she balances that well with like earnestness about her own like growing up experience and media consumption and the things that matter to her and how she learned how to pick those things apart. So it was a very well done balance of that humor and that earnestness. So yes, overall, great collection of essays. The subject matter really spoke to me, and I know that it's going to continue to be one that I think about a lot. So 5 out of 5 stars, and a beautiful way to end this video. That's it for me today. You guys have been seeing me coming to you from the future to fill in some gaps in this video, but all good. I am getting back into the practice and hang of making videos, but yeah, I figured it out. If you'd like to see more, I always get so nervous. Oh. I'm actually pretty excited about this. My God. Oh my gosh. I kind of forgot how bad this was in the beginning. But it is like bad, and then also like particularly suited for me to hate it bad. Like both things are happening at the same time. By the world father's untrimmed beard, it was colder than the night emperor's heart out here. And I was just like, oh. There's a bonus second part to this video available on my bindery for my members. It has 2 more wheel picks, and boy, one of them is a doozy. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's chat down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.